Welcome back to Shattered Trust Chronicles. If you're drawn to powerful stories about betrayal, tough decisions, and well-earned justice, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe and let us know where you're tuning in from. Let's dive into today's gripping tale. Jackson's voice boomed across the ballroom, slurring just enough to make the words land harder. Here's to Rachel, my partner in business and pleasure. The room erupted into laughter, but I couldn't hear it. All I could hear was the roar of blood in my ears, my hand tightening around the glass of bourbon I hadn't taken a sip of all night. My eyes locked onto Rachel, standing at the center of it all, her perfect smile plastered on like armor. Her fingers curled around Jackson's arm, just a touch too familiar. Her laugh just a little too forced. She knew I was watching. It wasn't just the words that crushed me. It was how seamlessly they rolled off his tongue. Like a joke they'd rehearsed 100 times. Like their betrayal had become a private joke, something they could laugh about over expensive wine and whispered plans. I didn't move. I didn't storm over there, didn't throw my drink, didn't cause a scene. That's what they wanted, wasn't it? To reduce me to the fool who didn't see it coming. Instead, I let my face remain blank. Gave a polite nod to the woman next to me who was trying to make small talk about the whore's d'oeuvres. But inside, a fire was spreading. Hot, fast, consuming. Rachel didn't look at me again after that toast, but I watched her. I watched the way she clung to Jackson. How her smile softened when she thought no one was paying attention, how his hand rested on the small of her back like he owned her. This wasn't just infidelity. This was mockery. This was a challenge. I spent the rest of the night blending into the crowd, listening, observing. Jackson couldn't seem to keep his mouth shut, drunk on champagne and self-importance. Every time I passed within earshot, he was bragging to someone else about the business, about Rachel, about their strategic partnership. Strategic, that's what they called it. By the time the night was over, I had enough fragments of their puzzle to see the shape of it. I didn't need to hear more to know what was happening. But they had no idea. No idea that their careless toast, their smug laughter, had just signed their fate. No idea that I wasn't walking away defeated. I was walking away with purpose. I wasn't going to confront Rachel with tears in my eyes or beg her to explain herself. I wasn't going to throw accusations or ask why she'd done it. That's what they expected. That's what would give them power. No, I was going to dismantle them. Quietly, systematically, completely. They thought they were untouchable. That was their first mistake. The morning after the gala, Rachel was her usual polished self, sipping her coffee like nothing had happened. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, as if the night before hadn't torn a hole through the foundation of my life. I watched her from across the kitchen, her movements calm and practiced. She was even humming softly under her breath, like someone who had absolutely nothing to hide. I didn't say a word about Jackson's toast. Not yet. Instead, I asked a question that had been gnawing at me since the gala ended. So, I said casually, leaning against the counter, "What's next for the studio?" Expansion. Rachel glanced up at me, her eyes narrowing slightly as if she was scanning my face for clues. "Expansion, eventually," she said, her tone measured. "But for now, we're just focused on growing the brand." "Why?" "Oh, no reason," I replied, smiling just enough to throw her off. "Just curious about all the partnerships you've been building." Her hand froze mid, reached for her coffee cup. It was subtle, the kind of hesitation most people wouldn't even notice. But I caught it. It was the first crack in her composure. I spent the next week playing my role as the oblivious, supportive husband. Rachel seemed to buy it. Or maybe she was too confident to suspect anything. She went about her usual routine, leaving early in the mornings for meetings and coming home late, smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't mine. Meanwhile, I started pulling threads. The first thing I did was revisit the studio's financial records, the ones Rachel had been so eager to offload onto me before the gala. The payments to Jackson's account stood out like a neon sign, but that wasn't all. There were invoices for consulting services that didn't make sense, unexplained withdrawals, and payments to what appeared to be shell companies. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. Rachel and Jackson weren't just having an affair. They were funneling profits out of the business I had sacrificed everything to help build. This wasn't just betrayal. It was theft. I hired a forensic accountant to confirm what I was seeing. They worked quickly, and within days, I had a full picture of the scheme. Jackson's consulting. Business was a front, and Rachel had been quietly moving money into his accounts for months, siphoning off profits under the guise of legitimate expenses. My first instinct was rage, an all-consuming white-hot fury that made my hands shake. But I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't afford to lose control now. Not when I was holding all the cards. I didn't confront Rachel directly. Instead, I started laying the groundwork for my revenge. First, I met with my lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Diane who immediately understood the gravity of the situation. "We're going to need evidence," she said, her tone sharp. "Something solid, indisputable. And you're going to have to act carefully. If she suspects anything, she'll start covering her tracks." Diane helped me draft a plan. Step 1 was to secure my financial position. I transferred what little savings I had left into an account Rachel couldn't touch and began quietly separating our joint assets. Step 2 was gathering evidence, not just of the financial fraud, but of the affair itself. That's where my next move came in. I hired a private investigator, a guy named Mark who had the demeanor of someone who had seen it all. "You just want proof of the affair?" he asked during our initial meeting. "No," I said. "I want everything." Mark delivered. Within a week, he handed me a file filled with photos, receipts, and call logs that painted a damning picture. Rachel and Jackson weren't exactly discreet. There were photos of them leaving hotels together, timestamps matching up with the supposed late meetings. Rachel had mentioned. The PCD re-assistance was a recording, a conversation between Jackson and another man taken in a bar. In it, Jackson bragged about how Rachel had been smart enough to keep her husband in the dark, while they split the profits right under his nose. Listening to that recording felt like being stabbed in the gut, but it also fueled me. Now, I had everything I needed to take them down. Rachel had no idea what was coming. She thought she was untouchable, that I was clueless, that her little empire built on lies and deceit was safe. But the wheels were already in motion. The first strike would come soon, and when it did, it would be devastating. The first domino fell the day I went to the bank. Rachel had always prided herself on being financially independent. It was her favorite line, one she threw around whenever someone asked about our business dynamic. What nobody knew was that her independence was built on my sacrifices. I was the one who drained my savings, cashed out my 4,000 DQ, and co-signed every loan to help launch her dream. But now, armed with the evidence I had gathered, I was taking back control. The banker, a sharp, suited man in his early 40s, raised an eyebrow as I handed over the financial records. "I'd like to initiate an audit of our joint accounts," I said calmly. "There's been suspicious activity I believe my wife is involved in." He studied the papers for a moment before nodding. "This might take a few days to process. You sure you want to go through with this?" I met his gaze without flinching. "Absolutely." Rachel's downfall wasn't going to be loud or dramatic. Not yet. It was going to be precise, like a surgeon cutting away rot. By the time Rachel returned home that evening, I had already begun executing my plan. She breezed through the door, talking about some investor dinner she needed to prepare for. She barely noticed me sitting on the couch, my laptop open, pretending to scroll through work emails. "How was your day?" I asked casually. "Boozy," she said, kicking off her heels and pouring herself a glass of wine. "There's so much going on with the studio. You wouldn't believe the stress." She didn't see the flash drive sitting on my desk, the one loaded with damning evidence of her fraud and infidelity. I watched her sip her wine, her expression serene, as if she weren't living a double life. It almost made me laugh. The next phase of my plan came the following week. With the help of my lawyer, Diane, I began quietly alerting key players in Rachel's business network. Investors, vendors, even her studio's landlord. They all received anonymous tips, backed by documents proving Rachel and Jackson were embezzling funds. I timed the messages carefully, ensuring they landed just as Rachel was preparing for a critical meeting about expanding the business. The fallout was immediate. The first call came while Rachel and I were having dinner. She glanced at her phone, her face paling slightly as she read the message. "I need to take this," she muttered, disappearing into the other room. I leaned back in my chair, savoring every muffled word of her frantic conversation. What are you talking about? No, that's impossible. There's no way anyone could know. When she returned, her calm veneer was cracked. She avoided my gaze, mumbling something about a misunderstanding at the studio. I played dumb, asking, "Everything okay?" Fine," she snapped, her voice sharper than she intended. The real bomb dropped 2 days later, when Jackson called her during breakfast. I was sitting right there when her phone lit up with his name. She glanced at me, then at the phone, hesitating for just a moment before answering. "What's going on?" she hissed, turning her back to me. I couldn't hear Jackson's words, but I didn't need to. Rachel's expression told me everything. Panic, desperation, anger. By the time she hung up, her hands were trembling. She didn't say a word to me, just grabbed her bag and left, claiming she needed to sort something out at work. What she didn't know was that I had already set the stage for her next failure. The audit I initiated at the bank had triggered a series of red flags in her studio's accounts. Payments were frozen, contracts flagged for review, and her credit line suddenly cut off. I made sure the timing aligned perfectly with her biggest investor meeting. When Rachel called me that night, her voice was shaking. "I don't know what's happening," she said. "Everything's falling apart. Someone's sabotaging the business." I kept my voice steady, even sympathetic. "That's terrible," I said. "Do you think it's one of your employees?" Her silence on the other end of the line was delicious. Meanwhile, Jackson was unraveling even faster. The private investigator had sent me another batch of recordings. This time of Jackson trying to talk his way out of trouble with a different investor. His arrogance was as Achilles' heel. Every time he opened his mouth, he left a trail of breadcrumbs for me to use. The final phase was coming. Rachel and Jackson thought they were just dealing with bad luck, a string of unfortunate coincidences. But soon, they would realize the truth. The storm wasn't a coincidence. It was me. Rachel's desperation was starting to show, but she still hadn't connected the dots. She thought she was in control, that this chaos was just an unfortunate series of mishaps. What she didn't know was that I had only just begun. The next strike came during a high-profile event at her studio, a networking brunch for potential investors. Rachel had planned it meticulously, sending out invitations weeks in advance and hyping it up to everyone in her circle. This event was supposed to be the start of her next big expansion. But I had other plans. The morning of the event, I sent an anonymous email to the city's tax fraud division, complete with copies of Rachel's falsified financial records. The same records she thought were safely buried under layers of fake invoices and bogus expenses. An hour into the brunch, just as Rachel was making her pitch to a group of well-dressed investors, 2 auditors walked into the studio. They were calm but firm, flashing their badges and asking to speak with the owner. I had a perfect view of the scene from where I stood across the street. Rachel's confident smile froze mid-sentence. She quickly excused herself, leading the auditors into her office. Through the large glass windows, I watched as they produced documents, pointing to specific lines, asking questions she couldn't answer. The investors didn't miss a thing. I could see their whispered conversations, the sideways glances they exchanged as Rachel's composure began to crumble. After about 20 minutes, the auditors left. But the Rachel emerged looking pale, her smile forced, trying to downplay the situation. But the whispers had already spread. A few investors left early, making polite excuses, their faces carefully neutral. By the time the brunch ended, Rachel's entire expansion pitch had collapsed. That evening, she came home furious. She slammed her bag onto the kitchen counter and poured herself a glass of wine, her hands shaking slightly. "Rough day?" I asked, keeping my tone light. Someone's sabotaging me," she said, her voice tight. "First the financial freeze, now this. It's not a coincidence. Someone is trying to destroy me." I raised an eyebrow, feigning concern. "Do you think it's Jackson? You said he's been acting strange lately." Her reaction was exactly what I'd hoped for. Her face darkened, and for the first time, I saw doubt flicker in her eyes. "Maybe," she muttered, more to herself than to me. "He's been careless, talking too much, making promises he can't keep." Perfect. I didn't need to plant seeds of doubt between her and Jackson. They were already there. But now, I was watering them, letting them grow until they choked the fragile trust they had left. Meanwhile, I continued to tighten the noose around Jackson's neck. Through my private investigator, I'd learned that he had been skimming from the money Rachel funneled to him. A portion of it went straight into his own accounts, funding a lifestyle far more lavish than Rachel knew about. I used that information to my advantage. A week later, Jackson received a call from one of his shell company accounts, informing him that their funds had been flagged for suspicious activity. The money was frozen pending an investigation, and Jackson was livid. Rachel had no idea that Jackson's problems were now directly tied to her. The same fraudulent transactions that funded his lifestyle were also linked to her studio, creating a web of evidence so damning that neither of them could escape it. Then came the confrontation I had been waiting for. Late one night, Rachel came home after a tense meeting with Jackson. Her face was a storm of anger and frustration, her usually impeccable appearance slightly disheveled. "What's wrong?" I asked, pretending to be concerned. She didn't answer immediately, just paced the kitchen, muttering under her breath. Finally, she snapped. "Jackson's been stealing from the business. He's been taking more than his share and lying about it." I blinked, feigning shock. "Are you serious? After everything you've done for him?" Her eyes flashed, and for a moment, I thought she might break down. But Rachel didn't cry. Instead, she poured herself another drink, her hands trembling as she gripped the glass. "I'm going to fix this," she said, her voice hard. "I don't care what it takes. No one screws me over." Her words would have been almost impressive if they weren't so pathetically ironic. I watched her retreat to her office, slamming the door behind her. She was unraveling, her confidence cracking under the weight of everything closing in around her. She thought Jackson was the enemy now. She thought she could still control the situation. But she had no idea that the real enemy was sitting just a few feet away, smiling quietly as her world fell apart. Rachel's meltdown after her meeting with Jackson was the crack I'd been waiting for. A sign that her carefully constructed world was finally collapsing. But the most satisfying part, she still didn't know where the real threat was coming from. The next day, I made my move. While Rachel was out handling things at the studio, I scheduled a meeting with one of her biggest investors, a man named Victor Reynolds. Victor was old money, a no-nonsense type who hated drama but loved profit. He had been one of Rachel's early supporters, investing heavily in her business when it was just an ambitious idea. "Why are you coming to me?" Victor asked as we sat across from each other in his sleek office. His piercing eyes bored into mine, and I could tell he wasn't in the mood for games. I slid a folder across his desk. Inside were copies of Rachel's financial discrepancies, Jackson's shell company transfers, and the fraudulent invoices tying everything together. "Because," I said calmly, "you're a major stakeholder in the studio, and if this comes out publicly, it won't just ruin Rachel. It'll tarnish your reputation, too. I thought you deserved the chance to protect your interests." Victor flipped through the folder, his expression unreadable. When he finally looked up, his mouth was a thin, grim line. "This is damning," he said, his voice low. "If even half of this is true, the business is finished." "It's true," I reply, all of it. Victor leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "And what do you want out of this?" "Only that you let this play out," I said. "Don't bail Rachel out. Don't give her more time or resources. Let her sink under the weight of her own choices." He studied me for a long moment before nodding. "Fair enough. But if this goes public, I'll have no choice but to distance myself. You understand that, right?" "That's exactly what I'm counting on," I said, standing to leave. Rachel wouldn't know it yet, but she had just lost her safety net. Later that evening, she came home visibly frazzled. Her confident mask was slipping. Her makeup smudged as though she hadn't had time to reapply it during the day. She poured herself a glass of wine, her fourth of the night, and muttered something under her breath about ungrateful investors. I leaned against the counter, watching her carefully. "Rough day. You have no idea," she snapped, her voice sharp. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "Victor's pulling out bot." I feigned surprise. "Victor. But he's always been one of your biggest supporters." She shot me a look that could have burned through steel. He said something about protecting his reputation. Whatever that means. I nodded slowly, pretending to think it over. Maybe he heard about Jackson's situation. Rachel's face darkened instantly. I could almost see the gears turning in her head, piecing together her own version of events. I wouldn't be surprised, she muttered, taking another sip of wine. Jackson's been reckless. I should have cut ties with him sooner. There it was, the beginning of the end for their partnership. But I wasn't done yet. 2 days later, the studio's biggest client, a high-profile celebrity fitness influencer, announced on social media that they were severing ties with Rachel's business. The post was vague but ominous, mentioning unethical practices and mismanagement. It went viral within hours, and by the time Rachel found out, her phone was exploding with calls and messages. "What the hell is happening?" she screamed, pacing the living room as she fired off frantic texts. "This can't be a coincidence. Maybe it's time to go public with your side of the story," I suggested calmly. "If people hear your version first, it might help control the narrative." She glared at me, as if trying to decide whether I was being helpful or patronizing. "I need to think," she muttered, storming off to her office. I followed her retreat with a quiet satisfaction. Rachel thought she still had options, that she could somehow salvage her reputation. But every move she made was leading her further into the trap I'd set. And the best part, she still hadn't realized I was the one pulling the strings. The next phase would be the most brutal yet. It wasn't enough to dismantle her business. I wanted her to see the full scope of her betrayal, to feel the weight of her choices and the pain of being utterly powerless. She had no idea what was coming. The night I set the final plan in motion, Rachel was in her office, frantically tapping away at her laptop. She didn't even glance up when I walked past. Her phone pressed to her ear as she argued with someone, probably Jackson. Her voice was sharp, her words clipped, but there was a tremor beneath her anger. Good. She needed to feel the walls closing in. I had spent the past few weeks carefully dismantling her empire, one piece at a time. The financial freezes, the anonymous tips, the investor withdrawals, they were all part of a larger strategy. But now it was time to deliver the knockout blow. Earlier that day, I'd made sure the final pieces were in place. The private investigator had sent me one last batch of evidence. Emails between Rachel and Jackson explicitly discussing their scheme to funnel profits out of the business. Jackson, arrogant and careless, had even joked about how idiot investors would never notice. I forwarded the emails to every major stakeholder in the studio: investors, clients, vendors, everyone who had ever trusted Rachel with their money or their business. The subject line was simple: the truth about Rachel Carlson's studio. Then I sat back and waited. By the time Rachel emerged from her office, it was nearly midnight. Her face was pale, her hair disheveled, and she clutched her phone like a lifeline. "Something's happening," she said, her voice shaky. "I think someone's hacking into my accounts. I'm getting emails. Clients are pulling out, investors are demanding refunds. It doesn't make sense." I stood in the kitchen, sipping my coffee, and gave her the same calm, unreadable look I'd perfected over the past few weeks. "Did you call Jackson?" She flinched at his name, her lips tightening into a thin line. "He's not answering," she admitted. I shrugged. "Maybe he's busy, or maybe he's cutting his losses." Her eyes snapped to mine, wide with panic. What's that supposed to mean? I let the silence hang between us, heavy and uncomfortable, before I finally said, "You don't think he'd throw you under the bus, do you?" "To save himself." Rachel stared at me, her breathing shallow. For the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. The next day, the chaos hit full force. News outlets picked up the story after one of the investors leaked the emails to a journalist. By noon, Rachel's name was trending on social media, alongside hashtags like "Ta fraud" and "scandal." I watched her pace the living room, her phone ringing off the hook as reporters, clients, and even friends demanded answers. Each call seemed to drain a little more life from her, her confident demeanor crumbling under the weight of the fallout. By evening, Jackson finally called her back. I could hear his voice through the phone, loud and frantic, as Rachel cornered herself in the kitchen, clutching the phone to her ear like a lifeline. "You promised this wouldn't happen," she hissed, her voice trembling. "You said we were safe." I couldn't hear Jackson's response, but whatever he said made her face twist with anger and fear. "You're a coward," she snapped. "If you think I'm going down alone, you're wrong. I'll tell them everything. Do you hear me? Everything." Her words echoed through the house, raw and desperate. She hung up abruptly and turned to me, her face pale. "I need your help," she said, her voice breaking. I raised an eyebrow, feigning confusion. "Help? With what?" Rachel hesitated, her hands trembling as she gripped the counter. "They're turning on me. Jackson's abandoning me, and the investors think I'm the one who stole from them. I didn't do this alone, okay? Her voice caught, and for a moment I thought she might actually cry. But I wasn't about to let her off that easily. "Rachel," I said quietly, stepping closer. "Or are you saying you did steal from them?" She froze, her eyes widening. For the first time, she seemed to realize what she had just admitted. "No," she stammered, shaking her head. "I mean, not like that. It's not what you think." I nodded slowly, pretending to consider her words. "You know, if I were in your position, I'd be careful who I trusted. If Jackson's already turning on you, what's to stop anyone else from doing the same?" Her face crumbled, and she looked at me like she was seeing a stranger. You knew," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You knew this whole time, didn't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The realization washed over her like a tidal wave. And for the first time, Rachel Carlson, the woman who had built an empire on lies and deceit, looked utterly defeated. And this was only the beginning. Rachel's spiral into chaos was accelerating, and I was in complete control of the descent. The day after our kitchen confrontation, she barely slept. She was up all night pacing, making frantic phone calls, trying to piece together how everything had fallen apart. By the time morning came, she looked hollow, dark circles under her eyes, her usual polished appearance replaced with a harried, disheveled mess. She still hadn't figured it out. She still thought this was Jackson's betrayal, combined with a cruel twist of fate. But that morning, I gave her just enough to steer her toward the truth. While she was buried in her laptop, muttering to herself, I set my coffee down with a deliberate clink. "You know," I began, keeping my tone casual. "I've been thinking about what you said last night, about Jackson turning on you." Her head snapped up, her bloodshot eyes locking onto mine. "What about it?" I shrugged, taking a slow sip of coffee before replying. "It just makes me wonder. Did Jackson actually turn on you? Or did someone else make him look guilty?" She frowned, the confusion in her expression quickly giving way to suspicion. "What are you talking about?" "Nothing," I said with a faint smile. "Just something to consider. People aren't always what they seem." "Are they?" Rachel didn't respond, but the doubt was already planted. That afternoon, I took the final step in dismantling her alliance with Jackson. Using the evidence I had gathered, I sent another anonymous tip to the auditors investigating her studio. This time, I made sure it included enough to incriminate Jackson entirely. His shell companies, his personal accounts, and even his drunken boasts about skimming profits. By evening, Rachel got the call she had been dreading. "Jackson's been arrested," she said as she paced the living room, her phone pressed to her ear. She wasn't talking to me. She was on the line with her lawyer, her voice shaking with barely contained panic. "They're saying he's the one who orchestrated the fraud. What does that mean for me?" I listened from the kitchen, pretending to be engrossed in a newspaper, as she frantically argued with whoever was on the other end. When she finally hung up, her hands were trembling. "This is bad," she said, more to herself than to me. "They're going to think I was involved. I have to fix this." Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Maybe it's time to come clean," I said quietly, setting the newspaper aside. "If you tell the truth, they might go easier on you." She stared at me like I just suggested setting herself on fire. "The truth," she spat. "You don't understand. The investors, the clients, everyone." "Rachel," I said, stepping closer, "they already are." Her expression crumbled, and for the first time, I saw tears welling in her eyes. She sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands, and let out a shuddering breath. "What am I supposed to do?" she whispered. For a moment, I let the silence hang between us. Then I leaned down, my voice low and steady. "Sometimes, I said. You have to lose everything to see the truth. Her head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. What does that mean? I straightened, my face impassive. It means you should start thinking about who really has your back. I left her sitting there, her mind clearly racing, and headed to the garage. I needed to make one last phone call to ensure the final phase of my plan went off without a hitch. The next day, everything came to a head. Rachel's name was plastered across every major news outlet. Headlines screamed about fraud, embezzlement, and betrayal, painting a picture of a businesswoman who had built her empire on lies. At the same time, Jackson's arrest revealed even more damning details about their partnership. While the authorities were focusing on him as the primary culprit, Rachel's involvement was impossible to ignore. By evening, reporters were camped outside our house. Their cameras flashing, Rachel tried to slip out unnoticed. She had no answers, no plan, and no one left to turn to. And I was just getting started. The next morning, Rachel woke up to a living nightmare. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, flooding with messages and calls from everyone in her crumbling network. Investors demanded explanations, reporters begged for statements, and clients were threatening lawsuits. The scandal was spreading like wildfire, and she couldn't stop it. I sat at the breakfast table, sipping my coffee, pretending not to notice her frantic pacing. She'd been on the phone for hours, her voice alternating between pleading and shouting. This is a smear campaign. She snapped at someone on the other end. Do you have any idea how much I've sacrificed for this business? She didn't notice me smirking behind my cup. By midday, the pressure was unbearable. Rachel stormed into the living room, her laptop under her arm and her face twisted with fury. I need to get ahead of this, she said, more to herself than to me. A press release, maybe a public statement, something to control the damage. I set down my coffee, keeping my tone neutral. Do you think anyone will believe you? She froze, her head whipping toward me. What's that supposed to mean? I shrug. With everything that's come out, it's going to be hard to convince people you weren't involved. Jackson's arrest, the leaked emails, the financial irregularities, it's all pointing back to you. Rachel stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she was struggling to form words. Finally, she blurted, You're supposed to be on my side. Am I asked, my voice calm and steady. Because for years, I stood by you. I supported you, invested everything I had into your dream, and now, this is where we are. Her face twisted in confusion, then dawning realization. You knew. She whispered. You've known all along. I stood, walking toward her slowly. Of course, I knew, Rachel. Do you think I'm stupid? The late nights, the unexplained withdrawals. I saw through it all. But I waited. I waited until you put everything you wanted on my sacrifices, and then I took it all away. Her eyes widened, you panic setting in. You did this. The leaks, the investigators, everything. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Rachel stumbled back, dropping onto the couch as the weight of my words sank in. Why? She asked, her voice breaking. Why would you do this to me? Because you destroyed us, Ray said, my voice cold. You took everything I gave you, my trust, my support, my life savings, and you used it to build a lie. You think I didn't hear Jackson at the Gala. You think I didn't know about the money you funneled to him, the profits you split behind my back. You betrayed me. And now you're paying the price. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. You don't understand. It wasn't like that. I was trying to protect the business. I needed Jackson too. I snapped, cutting her off. Don't insult me with excuses. You didn't need him. You chose him. And now he's dragged you down with him. Rachel collapsed into sobs, her shoulders shaking as she buried her face in her hands. For a moment, I almost felt a pang of pity. But then I remembered everything she had done. The lies, the deception, the months of watching her pretend I didn't matter. I walked to the door, pausing to look back at her one last time. You built this mess, Rachel. Now you can live in it, as I stepped outside. The chaos of reporters and cameras swarmed around me, their questions flying in every direction. Do you have any comment on your wife's scandal? Did you know about the fraud? What's your role in all of this? I turned to face them, a faint smile on my lips. No comment. Then I walked away, leaving Rachel to face the storm she had created. and the one I had unleashed. The storm outside the house raged on, both metaphorically and literally. Rain poured down in relentless sheets as the reporters continued their siege, shouting questions at Rachel through the gates. She had retreated to her office, a bottle of wine on her desk, her phone buzzing endlessly with calls and messages. I could hear her muffled sobs through the thin walls, the sound a strange mix of satisfying and pitiful. Rachel wasn't just losing her business. She was losing the carefully constructed image of control and power she'd clung to for so long. And now, she was completely alone. She didn't know it yet, but the worst was still to come. That evening, I made my way to her office, knocking lightly before stepping inside. Rachel didn't look up, her face buried in her hands. The desk in front of her was a mess. Papers scattered everywhere. Her laptop open to a news article that branded her as a fraud. "What do you want?" She mumbled, her voice hoarse. "I came to talk," I said, keeping my tone even. "About what happens next." She laughed bitterly, finally looking up. Her mascara was smudged, her eyes red from crying. "What happens next?" she repeated. "I lose everything, isn't that what you wanted?" "No," I said, sitting down across from her. "What I wanted was the truth. But since you couldn't give me that, I took matters into my own hands." Rachel's hands clenched into fists, her jaw tightening. "You're a monster," she hissed. I leaned forward, meeting her gaze. "Am I? Or am I just the man who finally made you face the consequences of your actions?" For a moment, we sat in silence, the tension between us almost suffocating. Then she broke, slamming her hands on the desk. "Fine," she snapped. "You want the truth. Jackson and I, we split the profits because we needed to. The studio was bleeding money, and the investors were breathing down my neck. He had connections. He helped me keep things afloat. Ate what cost?" I asked sharply. "You siphoned money out of a business I poured my life savings into. You lied to me. You let Jackson boast about your little arrangement in front of me, like I was too stupid to catch on." Rachel flinched, her anger deflating into despair. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she whispered. "I thought I could fix it before anyone found out. I thought I could protect you." I laughed, the sound bitter. "Protect me? Rachel, you didn't protect me. You used me. You saw me as nothing more than a bank account and a convenient excuse. Don't you dare pretend this was about saving me." Her shoulders slumped, her last shred of defiance crumbling. "So, what now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "No," I said, standing. "No, you deal with the fallout. The lawsuits, the investigations, the media. It's all on you. And as for us, there is no us anymore." Rachel's head shot up, her eyes wide with panic. "You're leaving." "I already have," I said, turning toward the door. "You just didn't notice until now." As I walked out of her office, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in years, I was free of the lies, the betrayal, and the weight of a marriage that had long since lost its meaning. But there was one final act left to play. The next morning, I sat down with my lawyer, Diane, to finalize the divorce papers. I made sure every clause protected me, ensuring Rachel couldn't touch another cent of what I had left. "I'll handle the filing," Diane said, glancing at me over her glasses. "Are you ready for this?" "More than ready," I replied. As I left Diana's office, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Victor Reynolds, Rachel's former investor. "Appreciate the heads up. If there's ever a business venture you're interested in, let me know. I'd be happy to back you." I stared at the message for a moment, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. The irony wasn't lost on me. Rachel's empire had fallen, and now, the doors she once kept closed to me were wide open. By the time I returned home, Rachel was gone. Her office was empty, the papers and wine bottle cleared away. She had left a note on the counter, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "I hope you're happy. You destroyed me." I crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. She was wrong. I didn't destroy her. She destroyed herself. And now it was time to rebuild what she had taken from me, on my own terms. The final chapter of Rachel's collapse wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet. Fitting, really, given how much noise she and Jackson had made while they thought they were untouchable. In the weeks following her departure, the studio was formally shut down. Creditors picked apart the business like vultures, lawsuits flooded in, and her name became synonymous with greed and betrayal. Jackson, already facing multiple charges, tried to strike a deal by pinning most of the blame on Rachel. It didn't save him. As for Rachel, she disappeared. No social media, no new address, no word from her. For a time, I wondered if she'd try to rebuild, but deep down, I knew better. She wasn't the type to rise from the ashes. She thrived in appearances. And once those were stripped away, there was nothing left. But this isn't a story about her. It's a story about what I learned. For years, I had poured everything into Rachel's dream, thinking it was ours. I ignored the warning signs, convinced myself that sacrifice was the price of love, and let my identity become entwined with hers. I was the supportive husband, the silent partner, the man behind the curtain, and in doing so, I forgot myself. Here's the thing: no one will value what you give if you're not careful about who you give it to. When I look back now, I realize Rachel's betrayal was the wake-up call I didn't know I needed. She taught me something important, not about her, but about myself. I had been so focused on building her dream that I'd neglected my own. After the divorce, I took a hard look at my life. I reached out to old friends I drifted away from, picked up hobbies I'd abandoned, and started pursuing a business idea I'd shelved years ago, a small woodworking shop. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. And you know what? For the first time in decades, I felt alive. If you're reading this, and you're a man in your later years, I want you to take something from my story. Don't lose yourself for someone who wouldn't do the same for you. Love and support should be a two-way street, not a one-sided sacrifice. Life is too short to invest in people who don't see your worth. Rachel thought she destroyed me, but she didn't. She gave me something priceless: clarity. I lost a lot in those years, but I gained something more important myself. And that, my friends, is worth every penny I'll never get back.
I came home that evening exhausted, my body aching from another brutal shift at the plant. The kind of exhaustion that seeps into your bones, that makes you want to collapse the moment you step through the door. But despite the fatigue, there was something waiting for me. Something I had been looking forward to for months. Kimberly's wedding invitation. It was sitting neatly on the kitchen table, propped up against the salt shaker like it had been placed there with care. The envelope was a soft cream color, expensive to the touch, embossed with gold lettering. Elegant, classy, exactly the kind of thing I expected from my little girl. I smiled to myself as I dropped my keys onto the counter. 7 years. 7 damn years I had spent saving every extra dime, working double shifts, cutting corners on my own life just to make sure this day, her day, was perfect. I had planned every detail with Susan, her mother, making sure Kimberly had the wedding she always dreamed of. It was all worth it. Every sleepless night, every missed vacation, every sacrifice. Because that's what fathers do. With a small exhale, I tore the envelope open, pulling out the thick cardstock. The font was delicate, scripted, the kind of thing you see in wedding magazines. Jonathan, you are cordially invited to celebrate the union of Kimberly and Matthew. My heart swelled. I imagined her in her wedding dress, the way she used to play dress-up as a little girl, twirling around in oversized lace and giggling. I had done everything to give her the life she deserved. Then my eyes landed on the next line. Walking the bride down the aisle. Her real father, Andrew. The words didn't register at first. I blinked, scanning the sentence again, my brain struggling to process what I was looking at. Her real father. The room suddenly felt too quiet. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock, the distant sound of a car passing outside. It all faded into the background. I read it again, and again. Andrew. Andrew, the man who hadn't been around since Kimberly was 3. The man who vanished when things got hard, who disappeared without child support, without calls, without a single goddamn care about the little girl he left behind. And now he was her real father? My hands tightened around the invitation, the edges crumpling slightly under the pressure. A cold, hollow feeling settled in my chest, slowly spreading outward like ice in my veins. I had done everything. The late nights when she had the flu, when she sobbed into my chest, burning up with fever. The scraped knees, the bedtime stories, the science fair projects I stayed up all night helping her with. The college tuition. The rent when she was struggling. The car when hers broke down. And the wedding. Every single check. Every single dollar. Every sacrifice. and I was nothing more than an ATM. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at those words. My pulse pounded in my ears. I wasn't sure if I was angry or just empty. Susan had to have seen this. She had to have approved it. Did they even think about how this would feel? Did Kimberly? Or did they assume I'd just take it? That I'd swallow the insult, smile, and keep playing the part of the good, quiet provider? The phone sat on the counter. I could have called Susan right then. I could have called Kimberly. I could have demanded answers. But I didn't. Instead, I set the invitation down, smoothing out the creases I had made. My hands were steady. Too steady. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to fight. Let them have their moment. Let Andrew bask in his undeserved glory. Let Susan pretend this was normal. Because the game had changed. I wasn't angry. I was calculating. And by the time the wedding was over, they would all know exactly who I was. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, just like I always did. My alarm went off at 5:30 a.m. sharp, and I rolled out of bed with the same mechanical precision I had for years. My routine didn't change. Not because I wasn't seething inside, but because I refused to give them the satisfaction of knowing just how deeply they had cut me. I got dressed in the dark, laced up my steel-toed boots, and walked downstairs. The invitation was still there on the kitchen table, right where I left it. The golden letters shimmered slightly under the dim light, like they were taunting me. Her real father, Andrew. The words should have made my hands shake. They should have made my stomach twist in knots, made my blood boil until I couldn't see straight. But they didn't. Instead, I picked the invitation up carefully, folded it with steady fingers, and slid it back into the envelope. I tucked it into the drawer next to the salt and pepper shakers, the same place I kept the utility bills and grocery receipts. Because that's all it was now. A transaction. A receipt for 7 years of sacrifice paid in full. I didn't call Susan. I didn't text Kimberly. I didn't even let myself dwell on what I wanted to say. Because I already knew how that conversation would go. Susan would sigh in that exasperated way she always did and tell me I was being dramatic. Kimberly would get defensive, say it wasn't a big deal, that I was making something out of nothing. And Andrew? He wouldn't say anything at all. Because men like him never had to. So I did what I always did. I went to work. I put in my 10-hour shift, nodding along as my coworkers talked about the weekend, about their kids, about their plans. I loaded pallets, checked inventory, and kept my mouth shut. But the entire time, a new thought was forming. One that wasn't fueled by anger, but by something colder, something quieter. By the time I got home that night, Susan had texted me. Susan, Kimberly wants to know if you got the invite. I stared at the message for a moment, then typed back 2 words. Me, I did. That was it. No accusations. No confrontation. She must have expected something more, because 3 dots appeared immediately. They flickered for a few seconds, then stopped. A minute later, another message came through. Susan, I know this might be hard for you, but it's her day. She just wanted to make Andrew feel included. Included? I saved for 7 years. I poured every ounce of myself into making sure she never went without. I was the one who stayed, the one who raised her, the one who loved her when no one else did. And now I was supposed to make room for the man who abandoned her? The man who had never lifted a damn finger for her, who had vanished when responsibility came knocking. My jaw clenched, but my fingers didn't move to type out the response she deserved. Instead, I took a breath, forced my heartbeat to slow, and replied, Me, of course. It's her day. I could almost feel Susan's surprise through the screen. I didn't fight. I didn't argue, and that unsettled her. Another minute passed before she sent her final message. Susan, I'm glad you understand. I placed my phone on the counter, exhaled slowly, and poured myself a glass of whiskey. She thought I understood. Kimberly thought I had accepted my place. Andrew thought he had won. They all thought I was just going to swallow this insult like I had swallowed every other one. Let them think that. Let them believe I was still playing the same game. Because while they were busy celebrating, while they were laughing and smiling and toasting to the real father, I was already planning. And when the day came, when everyone was gathered to watch Andrew take credit for my sacrifices, I would give them all a moment they would never forget. The first time I saw Andrew in over 20 years, He was standing outside a coffee shop, laughing like he had never missed a single moment of Kimberly's life. He was holding a to-go cup in one hand, his other hand casually resting in his pocket, leaning just enough to make it look like he belonged. Like this town, like these people, like this family had always been his. He had that easy, confident smirk, the kind of charm that probably made women forgive him for his sins before they even realized they'd been wronged. And God, was Susan eating it up? She was standing next to him, her body turned toward him just slightly, like muscle memory had kicked in after all these years. Her laugh was too bright, too familiar, like she was reminiscing with an old friend instead of a man who had walked out on his daughter before she even learned how to ride a bike. But the worst part? Kimberly. She was sitting at the outside table, hands wrapped around her coffee cup, smiling. Not the forced, guilty smile I might have expected, but something softer, something real, like she had been waiting for this, like she wanted this. I didn't react. I didn't move. I just stood there across the street, leaning against my truck, watching. Andrew was in town now, playing the role of the doting father like he had earned it. And no one, not Susan, not Kimberly, not a single damn person, seemed to remember the years I had spent making sure that girl never went without. The Christmases when money was tight, but I still made sure there were presents under the tree. The nights I stayed up late helping her with homework, even when I had a 5 a.m. shift the next morning. The heartbreaks, the celebrations, the scraped knees, the college acceptance letter I framed because I was so damn proud. None of it mattered. Not when he was back. I watched as Andrew gestured wildly, telling some story. The three of them laughed together, and something in my gut twisted hard. And then, as if fate just couldn't resist twisting the knife a little deeper, Andrew turned his head slightly, just enough for his eyes to meet mine. He didn't falter, didn't look guilty. He just smiled. A slow, smug grin that made my fingers twitch at my sides. He knew. He knew exactly what he was doing. And he knew I wasn't going to stop it. I forced my face to stay neutral. I gave him nothing. No anger, no reaction, no indication that I even cared. I let him soak in the moment, let him have his little victory, because he had no idea what was coming. I pushed off my truck, nodded once in his direction. A small, meaningless acknowledgement, then turned and walked away. Let him bask in his newfound fatherhood. Let Susan pretend he had always been the one by their side. Let Kimberly have her fairy tale moment. It wouldn't last. Not when I was done. The restaurant was one of Kimberly's favorites. An upscale little Italian place downtown. The kind of spot I had taken her to on birthdays, celebrations, and those rare moments when she just needed a night out with her dad. The kind of place she and I had shared for years, long before he came back. I had made the reservation weeks ago, back when I still believed this wedding would be a moment of joy for both of us. Back when I still thought I had a place in her life as more than just a name on a check. She was already at the table when I arrived, smiling as she waved me over. Dad, I was starting to think you stood me up. I smiled back, sliding into the seat across from her. Not a chance. She looked beautiful, glowing, really. There was an energy about her, a brightness I hadn't seen in a long time, the kind of happiness that came from knowing your future was finally falling into place. And yet, as I settled into my chair and placed the cloth napkin in my lap, I wondered if she even realized how much of that future had been built on my shoulders. We made small talk as we ordered, her going on about wedding plans, the seating chart, how stressful it had been but how worth it would all be in the end. I listened. I nodded. I asked questions where I should. But I didn't mention the invitation, didn't bring up him, didn't ask why she had chosen that wording, why she had erased me from the moment I had worked for years to give her. Because I didn't need to. I already knew. She had made her choice. The waiter brought our food, and for a little while, things almost felt normal. Almost. Then, as the plates were cleared and the wine glasses were refilled, I lifted mine. To you, I said, my voice steady, deliberate. To your new life. I hope this day is everything you dreamed. Kimberly smiled, but it faltered slightly at the edges. She lifted her glass, clinking it softly against mine. Thanks, Dad. And there it was, that tiny flicker of something in her eyes. Guilt. She felt it. She knew. She knew exactly who had raised her, who had sacrificed, who had given her everything. And yet, she had still chosen to rewrite the story, to let him step in at the final chapter and take the credit for a lifetime of work that wasn't his. I took a slow sip of wine, watching her over the rim of the glass. She didn't ask me if I was okay. She didn't try to explain, because deep down she already knew the answer. I set my glass down and leaned back in my chair, exhaling softly. She thought this was a quiet moment of closure, of acceptance. She had no idea. This wasn't a farewell. This was the calm before the storm. And when the storm finally hit, she would never forget it. The final invoice came in on a Wednesday afternoon. I was at my desk, halfway through a cup of coffee gone cold, when the email pinged onto my screen. Final payment confirmation, Kimberly and Matthew's wedding. I clicked it open, scrolling through the breakdown of costs. The catering, the venue, the flowers, the live band, the custom cake, the open bar, all of it. Every single detail had been paid for in full. By me. I hovered over the confirm payment button for a moment, just long enough to let the weight of it settle. 7 years of saving. 7 years of planning, working extra shifts, cutting corners on myself to make sure this day was perfect for her. And in return, her real dad will give her away. A lesser man might have hesitated, might have stopped the payment right there, might have sent a furious email, demanding to know why the man who had done nothing was getting the honor that had been mine since the day I first held her in my arms. But I wasn't a lesser man, so I clicked. Payment confirmed. It was done. The wedding was set, and so was I. The law office was quiet when I arrived, the kind of sterile silence that made you feel like everything happening inside those walls was life-altering. And in my case, it was. The receptionist recognized me immediately, nodding as she picked up her phone. "Mr. Keller is expecting you." She buzzed me through, and I stepped into the office of Michael Keller, the best damn lawyer I knew. He was sitting behind his heavy oak desk, sleeves rolled up, glasses perched low on his nose as he flipped through a thick stack of documents. "Everything in place?" I asked, lowering myself into the chair across from him. Michael glanced up, expression unreadable. "It is. But I need to ask you one last time. Are you sure about this?" I smiled. A slow, steady smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "By tomorrow night, they'll know everything." Michael exhaled through his nose, nodding as he slid a single folder across the desk toward me. "Then all that's left is this." I opened it, scanning the first few lines of the document. I already knew what it said. I had read through it a dozen times before, but seeing it printed, official, final, it hit differently. This wasn't revenge. This was correction. I pulled a pen from my pocket, flipped to the last page, and signed my name in sharp, precise strokes. Michael took the folder back, giving it one last look before pressing it closed. "All right, it's done." I pushed my chair back and stood, adjusting my jacket. "Tomorrow's going to be a hell of a night," Michael murmured as I turned toward the door. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Tomorrow, every single one of them, Kimberly, Susan, Andrew, would learn the cost of their choices. And my final gift? It would be unforgettable. The church was packed. Rows upon rows of guests sat with bright, expectant faces, their murmurs blending with the soft hum of the string quartet. The floral arrangements were extravagant. Tall ivory roses intertwined with delicate baby's breath, lining the aisles like something out of a fairy tale. It was perfect, because I had paid for perfection. I sat in the very last row, back straight, hands folded neatly in my lap. Just another face in the crowd. Just another forgotten man in a sea of people who had no idea what was coming. I had arrived early, slipping in through the side doors before anyone had time to notice me. Susan had made sure I wasn't part of the main wedding party, of course. No special seat reserved. No father of the bride duties. No acknowledgement at all. Instead, that honor belonged to Andrew. I spotted him standing near the altar, chest puffed out, smiling like he had earned his place there, like he had done more than just show up after 2 decades of absence. He was dressed to impress. Sleek black tuxedo, polished shoes, that same damn smug expression he had worn outside the coffee shop. Every now and then, he'd turn to the guests, shaking hands, nodding, charming his way through the crowd. A real father. The orchestra shifted to another melody, the change in tone signaling the procession was about to begin. The murmurs died down. People sat taller, eyes turning toward the grand doors at the end of the aisle. Showtime. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. The doors creaked open. Kimberly appeared. She was stunning. A vision in white, veil cascading down her shoulders, bouquet gripped tight in her hands. The room collectively inhaled, every eye drawn to her like she was something holy. She scanned the crowd, her gaze flitting over the familiar faces, searching. For a moment, I wondered if she was looking for me, if there was even a flicker of hesitation in her chest. But then she turned to Andrew, and just like that, the moment passed. He beamed at her, offering his arm like a real father should, and she took it. The music swelled, and they began the slow, ceremonial walk down the aisle, step by step, past the smiling guests who had no idea they were witnessing the biggest lie of the night. I watched, silent, waiting. They reached the altar. The priest cleared his throat. "Who gives this woman to be married today?" Andrew lifted his chin, his voice loud, confident. "I do." Laughter from the crowd. A soft sigh from Susan. And then, I stood up. Not loudly, not with any sudden movements. Just a slow, deliberate rise from my seat, my suit shifting as I straightened to my full height. The back row wasn't that far from the main aisle, but the silence that followed made it feel like a canyon stretched between us. Heads turned. People whispered. Up front, Andrew's smile faltered. Susan stiffened in her seat. Kimberly's fingers tightened around her bouquet. And in the heavy, expectant stillness of that perfect wedding, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the envelope, the final gift, the one that would make sure they never forgot this day for the rest of their lives. The silence that followed my movement was absolute. It was the kind of silence that didn't belong in a wedding. Weddings were meant to be filled with soft laughter, hushed whispers, the occasional sniffle from an emotional guest. But now, as I stepped into the aisle, the only sound was the soft shuffle of my dress shoes against the pristine white runner. I didn't rush. I didn't speak. I just walked, straight down the center, past rows of guests who turned in their seats, murmuring in confusion. Susan's face drained of color as she realized what was happening. She leaned toward Andrew, whispering something frantically under her breath. He shifted, uncomfortable now, trying to maintain the confident stance he had been so eager to display just moments ago. Kimberly stood frozen at the altar, bouquet clutched tightly in her hands. She looked at me, no, through me, like she was still trying to convince herself that this wasn't happening. But it was. I reached the front and stopped just a few feet away from them. Andrew cleared his throat, forcing a smile. Jonathan." I held up a hand, cutting him off without a single word. Then I turned to Kimberly. She blinked up at me, her lips parting slightly, but whatever she wanted to say never made it past her throat. I reached into my suit jacket, pulled out the envelope and held it out to her. For a second, she just stared at it. The weight of the moment crashed over her, over the guests, over everyone who had convinced themselves this was just another wedding, another perfect day in the making. I saw the hesitation in her eyes, the flicker of something deep, fear, guilt, dread. She didn't want to take it, didn't want to open it, because deep down she already knew. Susan's voice was the first to break the silence. "Jonathan," she hissed, leaning forward in her seat. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer. I just waited for Kimberly to take the envelope. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached forward and plucked it from my grasp. I stepped back, and without another word, I turned around and walked away, leaving them standing there, holding the moment, the weight of my presence, the truth that was about to come crashing down. Behind me, the whispers grew louder. The air felt heavier. And then, she opened it. Kimberly's fingers trembled as she unfolded the letter, her eyes scanning the first few lines in silence. The tension in the room was suffocating. No one moved. No one spoke. The priest stood frozen at the altar, his script forgotten. The guests fidgeted in their seats, their wide eyes darting between me, Kimberly, and the man who had claimed my place. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I knew exactly when she reached the part that mattered, because the second she did, her voice cracked. Her lips parted slightly, her throat working, but the words she was reading were swallowing her whole. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she began reading aloud. "Kimberly, I want you to know that I never hesitated. Not once. Not when I held you for the first time. Not through the scraped knees, the late-night fevers, the heartbreaks. Not when you needed braces or when tuition bills came, or when you called me at 2 a.m. because your car broke down on the freeway and you were too scared to figure it out alone. I never hesitated because that's what fathers do. And for 25 years I was your father. But today, I learned that I was wrong. A few gasps from the crowd. Kimberly faltered, blinking rapidly as if her eyes were betraying her. I heard her swallow hard before forcing herself to continue. Today, I learned that I was only the man who paid the bills. That the title of father belongs to the man who left when you were 3. The man who never lost sleep over your tears, never emptied his wallet to keep you afloat, never sacrificed anything for you. Her breath hitched. The weight of my words was pressing down on her, suffocating her. I let it. You chose him. And that's okay. Because choices have consequences. 7 years ago, I started saving for your wedding. I wanted it to be perfect. And it is. She broke off, looking around the lavish, candlelit hall, at the floral arrangements, the hand-selected menu, the live band waiting for their cue. Every single part of it paid for by me. Her breathing grew uneven. I heard Susan shift uncomfortably in her seat, heard Andrew clear his throat. But there was nothing they could do to stop this now. Kimberly looked back at the page, eyes darting toward the final lines. She was skimming ahead, already panicking. I saw it happen, the exact moment the final truth hit her. Her hands clenched around the paper. Her lips parted. But she read it anyway. Since I am not your real father, I have corrected my mistake. As of this morning, all payments made toward this wedding have been legally reversed. Everything I paid for is now his responsibility. The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, a strangled noise from Susan. Kimberly's knees buckled, and she gripped the altar rail for support, her bouquet slipping from her fingers and crashing to the floor in a heap of white roses. Andrew let out a nervous laugh, the confidence draining from his face as fast as the blood from his knuckles. "What the hell does that mean?" he demanded, turning toward me. I still hadn't turned around. I just stood there, listening to them unravel. Susan was already scrambling, rising from her seat, her voice shrill. "Jonathan, this is ridiculous. You can't just—" "Yes, he can." The voice came from the crowd. Michael Keller, my lawyer. He stood up slowly, buttoning his suit jacket as he walked forward, expression calm. "Yes, he can." And he did. Andrew turned red, his jaw tightening. "This is some kind of joke." "No," Keller said coolly, pulling out a folder and flipping through the documents. "As of this morning, all contracts with vendors, the venue, and catering have been legally reassigned to the man listed as the father of the bride. That would be you, Andrew." A stunned silence. And then the guests began whispering. Andrew blinked rapidly, looking at Susan, at Kimberly, at the now crumpled letter in her shaking hands. I didn't sign anything," he stammered, voice cracking with panic. "I never agreed to this." Keller smirked. "You didn't have to. The original contracts were in Jonathan's name, but since he was deemed not the real father, he filed for a reversal. The court approved it this morning." He closed the folder with a snap. "It's all yours now." Andrew paled. His mouth opened and closed, but nothing came out. Kimberly let out a broken sound, looking down at the letter like she could will the words to disappear. Susan's nails dug into her arms, eyes darting wildly as she tried to find a way out of the mess she had helped create. But there was no way out. The truth was laid bare for everyone to see, and I still hadn't said a single word. I straightened my suit, inhaled deeply, and finally, turned toward them, calm, collected, unshaken. Andrew looked like he wanted to lunge at me. Susan looked like she wanted to scream. And Kimberly? She looked at me with wide, desperate eyes. "Dad?" she whispered. But I wasn't her dad anymore. I nodded once, and I walked out. Behind me, the perfect wedding, collapsed in real time. The moment I stepped past the last row of chairs, the murmurs turned into a storm. People were leaning toward one another, whispering in urgent, hushed tones, their heads snapping between me, Kimberly, and the crumbling disaster unfolding at the altar. Susan was the first to break. She pushed up from her seat so fast that her chair nearly toppled over, her face twisting into something between desperation and fury. "This is a mistake," she hissed, whipping toward Michael Keller, who was still holding the legal documents like a judge at an execution. "There's no way a court would approve something like this. This is insane." Keller barely looked at her as he flipped open the folder again. "Actually, it's all perfectly legal. The payments were made under Jonathan's name, and since the contracts never listed Andrew as financially responsible, there was no reason for him to continue funding an event where he had been formally excluded from a parental role." Andrew's breath was coming faster now, his face drained of all color. This is fraud," he sputtered. "You can't just transfer tens of thousands of dollars of debt onto me. I never agreed to pay for this wedding." Keller smiled, that calm, knowing smile that only comes from watching an arrogant man realize he has been completely destroyed. "Of course you didn't," Keller said smoothly. "Jonathan did. And then he undid it." The room felt like it was closing in. Kimberly was still frozen at the altar, her fingers locked around the crumpled letter as she stared at me. At the exit, like she could somehow rewind the last 5 minutes of her life. Andrew ran a hand through his hair, his panicked gaze darting between Susan and the sea of guests now staring at him like he was a dead man walking. "Susan, fix this," he snapped. And that's when Susan truly panicked. Because she couldn't. She had spent years playing the role of the composed, graceful ex-wife, the mediator, the rational voice. But this was beyond her control. She turned back to me, as if I might still be convinced to take it all back, her voice suddenly softer, pleading. "Jonathan," she said, forcing a laugh that didn't quite land. "Come on, we can be adults here. You don't want to ruin Kimberly's wedding over a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. The gasps around the room turned sharper. The guests weren't just watching anymore, they were invested. I turned to face her fully, adjusting my jacket. The weight of her words was laughable. The hypocrisy of it. They had rewritten me out of my own daughter's life, had pushed me into the background, had handed my title over to a man who had never earned it. And now, when the consequences had finally landed, now it was a misunderstanding? I let the silence stretch just long enough to watch her squirm. Then, with an almost lazy tilt of my head, I said, "I'm just respecting their decision, Susan." Her lips parted, but no words came. I glanced at Andrew, who looked like he was still trying to process the financial execution that had just taken place. "You wanted to be the father, Andrew," I said casually. "And fathers pay for their daughters' weddings. Isn't that what this whole thing was about?" The room erupted. A wave of stunned gasps, of hands flying to mouths, of whispers turning into full-blown conversations as the guests realized what had actually happened here. Andrew took a step toward me, his face darkening. "You son of a..." "Ah," Keller interjected smoothly, stepping in just enough to remind him that legal consequences still existed. "Might want to think before you finish that sentence. You've got a lot of paperwork to sign today." Andrew turned back to Susan, his panic mutating into full-blown rage. "You told me everything was paid for, that all I had to do was show up." Susan's face burned red. I thought it was." Andrew let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "Oh, so I'm supposed to come up with 40 grand today?" He turned back toward Kimberly, throwing his arms up. "This is your wedding, princess. What are we supposed to do now?" Kimberly was still frozen, still holding the letter like it was a bomb that had gone off in her hands. She wasn't looking at Andrew. She wasn't looking at Susan. She was looking at me. Her lips trembled, and then, finally, she spoke. "Dad." It was a whisper, a desperate, shattered whisper, but I had already turned away. I walked toward the exit, the weight of years lifting off my shoulders with every step. Behind me, I heard the first of the guests standing. Some were leaving. Some were filming. Some were just enjoying the absolute destruction of the perfect wedding they had expected to witness. But me, I had nothing left to see, because my job here was done. I had nearly reached the doors when I heard Michael Keller clear his throat. It was a small sound, polite, controlled. Yet in the absolute chaos of the collapsing wedding, it sliced through the noise like a blade. "Ladies and gentlemen," Keller said, adjusting his tie as he stepped fully into view. Since there seems to be some confusion, allow me to clarify. The whispers died down. Every head turned toward him, sensing that whatever was about to happen was important. Andrew, still red-faced, still clenching his fists like an angry teenager caught in a bad prank, shot him a glare. "Who the hell are you?" Keller didn't even blink. "I'm Jonathan's attorney." Andrew scoffed, shaking his head. "Oh, of course you are. Look, buddy, I don't know what kind of legal stunt you think you pulled, but you can't just dump a bunch of wedding bills on me and walk away." Keller smiled, the kind of slow, knowing smile that comes right before the executioner pulls the lever. "Actually, I can." Andrew opened his mouth to argue, but Keller had already turned to the crowd, addressing them like a courtroom jury. All transactions made toward this wedding, including the venue, catering, floral arrangements, entertainment, and all deposits, were initially under the financial responsibility of Jonathan. He pulled out the folder, flipping it open with a practiced flick of his wrist. However, as of this morning, those contracts were legally reassigned. As Andrew has been recognized as the bride's real father, the financial obligation has been transferred to him. The room was dead silent. Then, "No," Susan gasped, surging forward, her hands raised like she could physically stop the words from existing. "That's not how this works." Keller lifted a single brow. "It is when the father of the bride requests a reversal of financial obligation and the court approves it." He tilted his head slightly. "You did make it clear that Jonathan was not the father, did you not?" Susan's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Andrew let out a breathless laugh, though there was no humor in it. You're telling me I owe tens of thousands of dollars for a wedding I didn't pay for?" Keller gave him an almost sympathetic nod. "Closer to 60, actually." A ripple of murmurs spread through the guests. Some of them audibly inhaled. $60,000. Andrew turned to Susan, his breath coming fast, sweat dotting his forehead. "Tell me you have savings," he hissed. "Tell me you can fix this." Susan's lips trembled. I don't." She looked around frantically, as if salvation might be hiding in the flower arrangements. "The deposits were already made. The vendors will be expecting payment by the end of today," Keller finished for her, snapping the folder shut. "Jonathan's name is no longer on the contracts. If you cannot provide full payment, all vendors have the right to cancel their services immediately." Susan's knees almost buckled. Andrew's face turned a sickly shade of gray. The weight of the situation was finally, fully sinking in. This wasn't just an argument anymore. This was a legal execution. Kimberly was shaking now, her entire body trembling as she turned toward me, her eyes wide, desperate. "Dad," she choked, voice barely above a whisper. You wouldn't really do this." "Not to me." I met her gaze, and I felt something then. Not anger, not even satisfaction, just a deep, unshakable clarity. I had spent my entire life making sure she never went without. I had poured everything into her future, into making sure she had every opportunity, every comfort, every ounce of love I could give. And when it truly mattered, she had erased me. She had chosen him. So now she would live with that choice. I didn't say anything, didn't offer her comfort, didn't fix it. I simply turned, placed a hand on the church doors, and stepped outside. Behind me, the dream wedding, the one I had built from the ground up, collapsed like a house of cards. And for the first time in 7 years, I was done. The letter slipped from Kimberly's hands, fluttering to the floor like a fallen petal from a bouquet that was never meant to bloom. The crisp paper landed on the pristine aisle runner, the words still glaring up at her, inked in finality. She stood frozen at the altar, surrounded by the ruins of what was supposed to be her perfect day. But it wasn't perfect anymore. Not with the whispers growing louder. Not with the guests turning to each other, shaking their heads, their expressions shifting from confusion to realization to something dangerously close to judgment. Not with him, her real father, standing next to her, his face pale, his jaw clenched so tight she thought his teeth might crack under the pressure. Kimberly's chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven breaths. This wasn't happening. This wasn't real. But then she looked up, her eyes locked onto him. Jonathan, her father, her real father. He stood near the church doors, still unreadable, watching. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't angry. He was just done. And that was the part that terrified her. Her voice barely made it past her lips. "Dad," came out weak, shaky. Jonathan didn't respond. Kimberly took a small step forward, the beaded hem of her wedding dress brushing against the abandoned letter. "I didn't mean." Her throat tightened, her words failing her. I just wanted him to feel included. I didn't think." A sharp, bitter laugh from the side. "Susan." She was still reeling, her face tight with barely restrained rage, her hands gripping her arms like she was physically holding herself together. But now, her anger wasn't directed at Jonathan. It was at Kimberly. "You didn't think?" Susan's voice was cold, sharp enough to slice through the heavy air. "Is that what you're going with? You didn't think?" Kimberly's stomach twisted. "Mom, No." Susan took a step forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "You didn't think when you let Jonathan pay for every dime of this wedding while you called him your real father." She pointed a shaking hand at Andrew, who was still standing stiff, looking as though he might faint at any second. "You didn't think when you humiliated the only man who ever stayed. And now look at where we are." Kimberly's hands curled into fists, but she couldn't find a single argument, because she had done this. She had let Andrew waltz back into her life like some long-lost hero. She had let him take the honor that had belonged to Jonathan. And now Andrew wouldn't even meet her eyes. He was still standing there, but his presence had changed. The charming, confident act had slipped away, replaced with something far more familiar: cowardice. He was already detaching, already mentally removing himself from the wreckage, because that was what men like him did. He had been more than happy to stand at the altar, to play the role, to bask in the admiration, until responsibility came knocking, until the price tag attached to his new identity was shoved into his hands. $60,000. And he didn't have it. Susan turned to him now, voice shaking with barely contained fury. "Well, are you going to do something?" Andrew blinked, like a deer in headlights. "What do you expect me to do?" Susan's lips curled. "You're her real father, aren't you?" The venom in her voice sent another ripple through the crowd. People were watching, really watching now. Andrew let out a breathless, humorless chuckle, shaking his head. This is ridiculous. You knew I wasn't paying for this wedding. This was never." "Oh, we know," Susan spat. "Everyone knows now." The guests weren't whispering anymore. They were openly talking. "I can't believe it. He abandoned her for years. And she let him walk her down the aisle? What kind of daughter does that?" Kimberly's breath hitched. Her heart pounded. This wasn't just a personal nightmare anymore. This was public. The wedding she had dreamed of for years had turned into something else entirely. A spectacle. Cautionary tale. She looked at Jonathan again, pleading silently. But he was already walking away. Not storming out. Not making a scene. Just leaving. Like he had finally let her go. The final blow wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was the quiet realization settling deep into her bones. She had lost him, and it was her fault. I reached the church doors and paused for just a second. Not to look back. There was nothing worth seeing anymore but just to breathe, to let it all settle. Behind me, the chaos had fully unraveled. Susan's voice had turned shrill, desperately trying to salvage the wreckage. Andrew was panicking, arguing with the wedding planner, the caterers, anyone who might have an answer he didn't want to hear. Kimberly, she wasn't speaking at all. I straightened my suit, exhaled slowly, and stepped outside. The sun was warm on my face. The air was crisp. The world beyond that church was still turning, still moving, still untouched by the mess they had made inside. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt light. No more obligations. No more sacrifices. No more waiting to be appreciated by people who had already made their choice. I had walked into that wedding a forgotten man. I walked out free. And as I strode toward my car, leaving their perfect day in ruins, I allowed myself the smallest, quietest smile. They had given me my freedom, and I had given them exactly what they deserved.
Monica tipped her wine glass toward the candlelight, swirling the deep red like she was preparing a toast. Dennis watched the spiral, not the wine her hand. How it danced too easily these days. Light, flirty, careless. It had taken years for her to stop biting her nails. Now they were perfect. French manicured. She said it was for work. Impressions matter in HR, she told him. She had just served the second course, stuffed mushrooms from a Pinterest recipe she tried once before, 2 years ago when she was still trying to impress him. Tonight, the effort wasn't for him. He knew that by the garnish. Parsley. She always said he hated parsley. But there it was, sprinkled like confetti across his plate. She took a long sip, eyes glinting. And then it came mid-mouthful, as if the words had been sitting on her tongue for days. I'd totally cheat if I knew I wouldn't get caught. She laughed. A breathy, unbothered sound that floated above the table like steam. Dennis didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't look at her. He simply placed his fork down, gently, precisely, then stood up. No questions, no yelling, no begging for context or pretending to misunderstand. He walked down the hall like a man headed to a meeting. And in a way, he was. The bedroom door closed with the soft click of finality. Monica blinked, her smile twitching, unsure whether she had won a point or struck a nerve. She poured another glass, muttering something about him being touchy. She didn't know that Dennis had stopped being touchy 10 years ago. That something in him had been quietly logging, indexing, cataloging every joke, like tonight's. Not out of insecurity, but habit. Pattern recognition. He didn't shout because he never needed to. Dennis didn't do chaos. He did code. And right now, he was already executing a subroutine he'd built in his head months ago, maybe even years. By the time Monica stood up to clear the table, he had already chosen the object. Not a knife, not a letter, not drama, just a key. Her spare house key. One she gave him when they first moved in. It sat now, perfectly centered on her side of the bed. Next to it, a slim gray USB drive. It was innocuous, silent. But inside, it contained something sharper than any blade Monica could have imagined. Her own words, her own maps, her own synced betrayals. A few feet from that key was her phone backup log. Not the data itself, just a printed table. Dates, file sizes, sync locations, highlighted entries. No explanation needed. She wouldn't find it until later. For now, she finished her wine in the kitchen, annoyed at the silence. He's sulking again, she muttered under her breath. Jesus. But deep down, beneath the wine, the sarcasm, and the buzz of imagined superiority, something was beginning to curdle. Because for the first time in their 12-year marriage, Dennis hadn't argued. He hadn't asked for clarification. He hadn't asked for anything. And something about that, something about the precision of his exit, the way he walked without looking back, made the air around her start to press in. She was still smirking when she entered the bedroom 30 minutes later. The lights were off. The comforter was folded at the foot of the bed. That struck her as odd. Dennis always left it messy. Said it was for airflow. Then she saw it. The key. And the flash drive. She picked them up, eyebrows knitting together. The drive had a single piece of tape across it. On the tape, in his neat handwriting. Try me. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she masked it with a scoff. Oh, come on, she said to no one. This is ridiculous. She turned toward the nightstand and froze. There, propped up against her alarm clock, was a manila envelope. Legal-sized. Slightly open. Inside, barely visible in the dim light, were paper edges thick with ink. Printed screenshots. Highlighted text. She didn't scream. Not yet. But her hand tightened around the USB drive. And in the corner of her mind, between wine fog and bravado, Monica felt something icy start to snake around her ribs. Dennis hadn't threatened her. He'd handed her the first stone and let her realize she'd already built her own gallows. Dennis didn't pace. He didn't sweat. He moved like a man walking through a fire drill he'd memorized a year ago. The closet door opened without a sound. He reached above the winter coats and pulled down the unmarked shoebox Monica once joked about. "What are you, CIA?" she'd laughed. He didn't answer then either. Inside were 2 phones. Old. Charged. Wiped clean months ago, and then loaded again, not with his data, but hers. One had been linked to her old iCloud account. The other had her Gmail synced via an app she never logged out of. He had found the breadcrumbs a year ago, when she was too busy mentoring new hires on weekends. Tonight, that prep work was no longer theoretical. The external drive sat waiting. 2 terabytes. Partitioned by purpose, her words, my notes, and the middle. That last one was Dennis's favorite. It contained overlapping GPS data, hers and his, placed on a time-lapse map. Dozens of pins. Red for her, blue for him. Every time she claimed she was stuck in traffic, or at Rachel's, the map told a different story. She hadn't been careful. She'd just assumed he wasn't watching. She wasn't wrong, until now. The printer kicked on at 9:37 p.m. sharp. Quiet hum. No alerts. Dennis had already disabled notifications months ago. The first printout was a WhatsApp transcript. Monica and Greg discussing a canceled conference in Phoenix that never actually existed. There was a meme she sent him, something childish, about work husbands. But Dennis's eyes locked on Greg's reply. Imagine if he knew you called out sick just to come see me. Next came a confirmation email. 2 tickets to a jazz club in Baltimore, booked under her maiden name. Interesting touch. Almost clever. Almost. Then there was the voice memo, buried deep inside a drive folder called HR Retreat 2022. A 4-minute audio clip. She hadn't known the voice recorder was on. At first it was muffled laughter, clinking glasses, small talk, until her voice cut through. He's so focused on work, he doesn't even notice. I could literally have sex on the living room floor, and he'd offer us coffee after. Dennis didn't rewind it. He didn't even listen to the rest. He just clicked, dragged, and dropped it into the folder labeled for her. He created 3 folders total. For her. Screenshots. GPS logs. That voice memo. A clean, chronological PDF with annotations. No accusations. Just timestamps. For me. Printouts of financial accounts in his name only. Statements showing transfers he made in the past 6 months. The new bank he'd opened across town. Passwords changed 2 weeks ago, preemptively. For the lawyer, a neat file titled Post-Nup Enforcement. He'd remembered the document she signed 5 years ago after their second separation scare. She was terrified he'd leave then, so she agreed to a clause. Infidelity equals forfeiture of joint assets. She never read the fine print. Dennis had it memorized. By 11:05, the folders were printed, labeled, and sealed into 3 separate envelopes. The one marked for her sat atop the manila envelope on her side of the bed. He added the USB, the house key, nothing more. He didn't cry, didn't tremble. He sat for a moment in the dark, watching the light under the dining room door flicker as Monica moved around. Probably finishing dessert. Probably rehearsing a joke about his tantrum for Rachel. In her mind, she still owned the room. Still owned him. But the truth was, Dennis wasn't there anymore. He wasn't preparing revenge. He was finalizing his escape. And unlike Monica, he never needed to hide. It was almost midnight when Monica finally shut off the kitchen lights. She wasn't drunk, exactly, just pleasantly buzzed, the way she always was when she thought she'd gotten away with something. She padded barefoot down the hallway, brushing imaginary lint off her silk pajama shorts, rehearsing in her head the casual line she'd used to smooth things over. You seriously got that upset over a joke? Babe, come on. The bedroom was dark when she opened the door. Just like she expected. What she didn't expect was the silence. No soft breathing. No rustle of sheets. Dennis was a loud sleeper, light snore, nasal whistle, little sighs that annoyed her more than she ever admitted. Tonight, there was none of it. She flicked on the side lamp. The bed was pristine. Not unmade. Pristine. The comforter was folded with military precision at the foot of the bed. Like a hotel turn-down. Except this wasn't hospitality, it was a message. On her pillow sat 3 objects. First, the key. Her house key. The one she gave Dennis on their anniversary, back when she made a show of trust. Back when she still cooked from scratch. He'd added it to his ring the same night. It had never left his pocket since. Until now. She tilted her head, half amused. Oh, please, she mumbled. What is this? A Lifetime movie. The second object, a flash drive. Plain gray, with a small strip of tape across the front. In Dennis's handwriting. Try me. That one made her blink. Not because she feared what was on it, yet, but because Dennis didn't do drama. He didn't make statements. He quietly absorbed. Made charts. Fixed routers. This felt like something else. Like a provocation. Or a trap. Still, her reflex was mockery. Cute, she said to the air, rolling her eyes. Really leaning into the melodrama, huh? She picked up the flash drive, twirling it between her fingers. Then she saw it. Just past the edge of the pillow, tucked almost discreetly beside the lamp, a legal-sized manila envelope. Thick, heavy, no label, just slightly open at the corner, revealing the edge of what looked like printed paper, dense, dark, sharp-edged. She hesitated, not out of guilt, not yet, but because Dennis never left things unfinished. And this looked finished. Her buzz evaporated. She sat on the edge of the bed, still clutching the flash drive like it might explain itself. The envelope didn't scream revenge. It screamed receipt. She touched it. The paper inside was warm, not metaphorically, literally. From the printer. Still fresh. That meant he'd been here less than an hour ago. And now he wasn't. She grabbed her phone from the nightstand. No texts. No missed calls. No, I need space, or we need to talk. Just nothing. She opened the envelope. Her stomach clenched before she even processed the first page. Screenshots. Pages of them. Full-resolution prints of WhatsApp chats, Messenger DMs, even some random third-party apps she barely remembered installing. All with names she recognized. Greg. Julian. Blake. There were dates. Locations. Timestamps. There was even a reservation for a work dinner at a rooftop lounge 2 months ago under a fake name. She turned to the second page. It was a transcript. Her own words. In a group chat with Rachel and 2 others, all joking about husbands who think trust is loyalty, not just low expectations. She stopped laughing. She flipped through the rest in a haze. Somewhere in the middle of the stack was a copy of a postnup. Her signature. His. Date stamped and notarized. Then came the spreadsheet. It wasn't dramatic. Just data. Line after line of account numbers, transfers, balances. A quiet announcement. Your access has been revoked. Her hands started to shake. She rushed back to her phone. Tried calling him. Straight to voicemail. Once. Twice. Then she saw the banner at the top, call forwarding active. He'd already redirected everything. The house was still warm. His scent still hung in the bedroom air. But Dennis was gone. And for the first time in a long, long time. Monica was sober. Not from wine. From delusion. From the illusion that she still held the upper hand. The flash drive sat in her lap. Try me. She suddenly wasn't so sure she wanted to. Monica set the flash drive down like it was radioactive. Her fingers tingled, not from nerves exactly, but something older. Something animal. The creeping dread that comes when you realize the shadow you saw in the corner wasn't imagined. It was waiting. Watching. She turned back to the envelope. The top sheet was simple. Her full name in bold. Center aligned. Below it, one sentence. You joked. I checked. No greeting. No accusation. Just a heading. Below that, a table of contents. 6 sections, neatly labeled. Messages, locations, financials, audio, photos, agreement. The first section hit like a slap. Page after page of screenshots, organized by app, Messenger, WhatsApp, Signal, even Slack. Each printout had a header, date, time, contact name. The first was from Greg. The same Greg she swore was just a coworker. The timestamps told a different story. 1:04 a.m., 3:17 a.m., 5:42 a.m., one right before she crawled back into bed after a late Zoom call with Australia. Greg, I can still taste you. Monica, don't. I feel guilty. Greg, you said your husband would never find out. Monica, he's Dennis. He's allergic to confrontation. Monica's lips parted, but no sound came. She kept flipping. Every new message came with a deeper sting. These weren't flirty jokes. They were confessions. Coordinates. Plans. And all of them had been synced, some through her old Google account, some through her work calendar. She hadn't been hacked. She'd been predictable. Then came the second section, locations. A side-by-side comparison of her GPS pings versus company travel records. One page highlighted a weekend she claimed to be visiting her sister in Chicago. Dennis had included a hotel confirmation. Not for Chicago. Denver. 2 nights. King Suite. Under a fake name, but paid with the joint credit card. She swallowed. Her mouth had gone dry. Then the financials. Bank withdrawals at 2:31 a.m. in cities where she was at a leadership summit. ride receipts for trips to and from bars miles from the convention centers she was supposedly attending. He'd flagged the dates, matched them to calendar invites, attached blurry screenshots of Facebook check-ins by her conference friends. They tagged her. She never noticed. Then she saw the voice memo, labeled HR_2022_drinks.m4. She recognized the file name. It was from the retreat she half remembered. Too many margaritas, one of those nights where she thought she was being charming, funny. The transcript lay printed below the label. Monica, he doesn't ask questions anymore. I swear I could sleep with someone on our damn couch and he'd still make me breakfast the next morning. Laughter. Monica again. That's the upside of marrying a man who lives in his head. You live in his blind spot. Her hands clenched. She looked around the room, as if someone might still be watching. The house felt colder now. The silence buzzed. The last page, section 6, was just 3 pages stapled together. At the top, postnuptial agreement, executed July 14, 2018. She remembered the day vaguely. After a bad fight, she'd said she was sorry. He'd asked her to sign something to show we're serious. She skimmed it while half watching TV, laughed when she signed it. She had no idea what it said, but now it was right there, highlighted in yellow. In the event of substantiated infidelity, the non-breaching party shall retain 100% control and ownership of all marital property, including but not limited to joint bank accounts, real estate holdings, and retirement assets. And beneath that, in her own handwriting, the signature, Monica L. Greer. Suddenly the air was too thick. She tried to stand but sat back down immediately. Her legs weren't working right. Nervous laughter escaped her mouth before she could stop it. A soft, panicked giggle that died just as quickly. She reached for her phone again, hoping for a text, a voicemail, some sign that this was just a punishment, that she could beg, grovel, charm her way out. Still nothing. It was then that she noticed the smallest detail, and it nearly broke her. The folder that had held the agreement, printed in high resolution, crisp corners, it had a crease, like it had been folded and unfolded many, many times. Dennis had been carrying it with him, maybe in his briefcase, maybe in his car, like a man carrying an umbrella under a clear sky, not because he feared rain, but because he knew the storm was coming, and now it had arrived. Monica hadn't slept, not even for a second. She sat on the edge of the bed until the sky turned that ugly blue-gray, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. Her thumb hovered over Dennis's name for nearly an hour before she sent the first message. 6:17 a.m. Dennis, can we talk? 6:18 a.m. I was kidding last night. Please don't do something stupid. Nothing. No read receipts. No typing bubble. Just the flat silence of a message that disappeared into the void. She waited. Maybe he was driving. Maybe he just needed space. He was always slow to react. That was Dennis, measured, methodical. She told herself he was probably at a diner, eating his boring toast and black coffee, waiting to calm down. But doubt creeps fast when the air is this still. At 6:31, she called him, straight to voicemail. The automated voice didn't even ring once, just dropped her into the abyss. She hung up, waited 60 seconds, called again. Same result. She redialed obsessively for 10 minutes before noticing something strange. Her own name, at the top of the screen, had a small icon next to it. One she didn't recognize. A small arrow. Call forwarding. She opened the settings, and her stomach flipped. The number listed under forwarded calls was unrecognizable. A landline. Area code from a nearby town. Dennis never used it. That meant he had already set this up before the night even ended. He hadn't just left the house. He'd amputated her from the system. She scrambled to the laptop, fingers clumsy on the keyboard. Tried to log into their joint banking portal. Access denied. Reset password. Verification failed. Tried the shared budgeting app she hated, but he insisted they keep. Account deactivated. Her hands shook. She opened her email. The family account they used for bills. Gone. Password changed. She tried to check the cloud folder where they stored their insurance info. Empty. Everything was being pulled out from under her, one thread at a time. And the worst part? There were no warnings. No angry letters. No dramatic confrontations. Just quiet, devastating erasure. She sprinted to the kitchen, grabbed the folder off the counter where Dennis used to leave bills and mail. It was gone. Every paper, every document, even the checkbook. She pulled open drawers, random, desperate. He had taken every scrap of financial documentation. Even the fireproof safe was empty. She collapsed into the kitchen chair, phone in hand. Still nothing. So she tried again. 7:03 a.m. This is insane. I was joking. You're blowing everything out of proportion. 7:05 a.m. Dennis, please. Can we just talk like adults? 7:11 a.m. I know I messed up. Just call me. Please. I'm scared. But her texts were screaming into a canyon. No echo. No ping back. The man who had shared her life for 12 years, who'd brought her coffee while she feigned hangovers, who once typed up her resignation letter because she said her hands were too shaky, had gone ghost. Not like a coward, like an architect. Because this wasn't chaos. This was a blueprint. And she wasn't in it anymore. At 8:12 a.m., Monica sent Rachel a text. Can you talk? 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Finally, at 8:41, her phone buzzed. Did you say that at dinner? In front of him. Monica's stomach knotted. She stared at the message like it was in another language. Rachel never texted like that. No emoji. No OMGs. No girl. Just cold. She typed a reply, deleted it. Typed again. It was just a joke. I didn't mean it. Seen. No response. Then, 5 minutes later, a second message dropped in. He came by. Asked me one question. I couldn't lie for you. That was it. No explanation. No clarification. Just silence. Monica's hand hovered over the call button. But she didn't press it. Something in her gut whispered, she won't answer. Not now. Instead, she tried Lisa, their weekend yoga buddy, her go-to gossip partner. Hey, rough night. Can I crash at yours? Read. No reply. She tried Emily, her co-worker, the one who always called Dennis cute in a nerdy way. Need a ride to the office. Mine. No response. Then she tried calling Greg. Straight to voicemail. She threw her phone across the couch, resisting the urge to scream. This wasn't normal. These people weren't her anymore. They were acting like they'd seen a ghost, and that ghost was wearing Dennis's face. She sat in the silence, trying to reverse engineer the damage. Dennis had gone to Rachel? When? How? What did he ask? And what did Rachel give him? The voice memo. She thought of it again. The transcript. Her words. I could sleep with someone on our damn couch, and he'd still make me breakfast the next morning. Had Rachel heard it? Had he played it? Monica had always assumed Dennis was passive. That he would bottle things, bury them, maybe one day explode in some benign way. An affair of his own, maybe, or a midlife sports car. She never imagined this. This was not the reaction of a man scorned. This was a man in strategy mode. He wasn't just walking away. He was pruning her world. Cutting her off not just from him, but from everyone she thought she could fall back on. She checked Facebook. Her account was still active, but her last 3 photos had new comments. One of them, a beach picture from 2 months ago, her in a sundress, tagged in Baltimore, had a new like. Dennis's sister. Monica hadn't spoken to her in years. Below it, a comment from someone she didn't know. Funny how lies always leave shadows. The pit in her stomach sank lower. She pulled up Messenger. Typed Rachel's name. The app glitched for a second, then showed a red exclamation point. Can't deliver. Blocked. 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 She tried 3 more names. All gone. Dennis hadn't just pulled the financial rug out. He had dismantled the net beneath it. And he'd done it silently. Without threats. Without tantrums. Like a man taking out the trash. One bag at a time. And now Monica sat in a quiet house, surrounded by pillows, pictures, and things that used to mean something, and realized she'd been evicted from her own life. Not with a bang, but with absence. The security guard gave her that look. Not the one that said, "You're not allowed here." Worse, the one that said, "We both know what this is." Monica had been standing outside the lobby of Dennis's office building for nearly 40 minutes. No umbrella. No plan. Just a sinking sense of purpose and a jacket 2 sizes too thin for the rain that had started 10 minutes ago and showed no sign of stopping. She ignored the glances from passers-by. She didn't care that her heels were soaked or that her blouse was starting to cling. None of that mattered. He always left around 5:30. She remembered because she used to joke about how predictable he was. Right now, she was counting on it. At exactly 5:33, the glass doors hissed open, and there he was. Dennis, her husband, hair slightly damp, briefcase in hand, same gray coat he always wore when the weather dipped. Except now he looked taller, colder, like a man walking out of a fire he didn't bother warning her about. She stepped forward too quickly, almost slipping on the wet concrete. Dennis. He stopped, didn't flinch, didn't soften, just looked at her like she was a contractor he didn't hire, standing in his way. I need to explain, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. A pause. Then, quiet and measured. I don't think you do. It hit like a slap. Her breath caught, and for a moment, she just stood there, blinking raindrops off her lashes. I didn't mean it like that, she stammered. You know Dennis, I was joking. I swear. He didn't raise his voice, didn't lean in, just stepped back when she moved forward, avoiding her hand like it might stain. I didn't leave because of the joke, he said calmly. I left because you meant it. Monica's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He looked past her, as if she were just another pedestrian waiting for a cab. Then he walked around her, not away from her, through her, as if she had already become air, as if his grief had expired long before this moment, and all that was left now was clean, practiced distance. She turned to follow, but the doorman stepped in, not forcefully, just politely, which somehow made it worse. Ma'am, he said, already looking past her. He asked that we not allow visitors after hours. Her mouth twitched, like she might argue. But what was she going to say? That she used to be his emergency contact? His wife? His everything? None of that mattered now. Not here. She stepped back onto the sidewalk, where the rain fell harder than she remembered. Her mascara had begun to sting her eyes. She could feel her soaked blouse plastered to her skin. A man in a suit walked past, gave her a sympathetic glance, and kept moving. She looked down at her phone. Still nothing. No missed calls. No unread messages. No digital breadcrumbs of forgiveness. For a moment, she thought about waiting again, just camping there until he came back out. Maybe he'd forget something. Maybe he'd turn around. But the cold started to bite, and the pitying glances from strangers made it unbearable. She stood still as the city moved around her, dripping, half shaking, mascara running in ugly streaks. Then, for the first time since it all began, Monica understood. Dennis hadn't ghosted her. He hadn't run away. He had simply finished, and she had missed the ending. By the time Monica stepped into her office the next morning, the building already felt different. Too quiet. She scanned her badge at the glass turnstile, and it buzzed like always, but this time, no green light. No click. Just red. Access denied. She blinked. Tried again. Still red. She glanced at the receptionist, who gave her a stiff smile, the kind that meant something's happening, but I'm not allowed to say what. Technical issue, Monica muttered, already dialing the internal help desk. No answer. She left a message, trying to sound casual, though the edges of her voice were fraying. Then she took the stairs. By the time she reached the 8th floor, her silk blouse clung to her back with sweat. HR sat like a fortress at the end of the hallway. Frosted doors. Polished furniture. She knocked. One of the coordinators, Paula, opened the door, her eyes flicking up with something between surprise and discomfort. Monica. Can you wait in the small conference room, please? Why? What's going on? But Paula was already turning. Inside that room, Monica's mind started spinning. She had known this might happen. Dennis wasn't impulsive. If he planned this, he wouldn't just take the house and money. He'd take her standing. In the HR code, she knew the clause. Moral conduct violations, including extramarital affairs impacting workplace relationships or performance, are grounds for immediate review and possible dismissal. She'd helped write it. She tried to get ahead of it. The night before, she composed a carefully worded email to her division head. There's a personal situation developing. I want to be transparent in case you hear something out of context. She didn't send it. She wanted to sleep on it. Too late. The door opened 15 minutes later. Not her manager. Not the director. 2 people from corporate HR. And a sealed envelope. Monica, one of them said without sitting, "We've received documentation that requires immediate review." Her heart rate tripled. They slid a printed email across the table. Subject line: for your review, regarding employee Monica Greer. From Dennis Greer. Attached, 13 PDF files. Cross-checked expense reports from company cards. Hotel receipts. Call logs from business trips. Screenshot of text messages arranging off-site meetings during office hours. Photos from public social media accounts, her, Greg, and another colleague taken during a sick leave week. Each file was titled, timestamped, and annotated. The entire timeline of her lies. Dennis had structured it like a corporate audit, the way she used to back when she still cared. She barely heard the rest. Something about administrative leave. Something about pending further investigation. Something about the code of conduct she used to enforce on others. Her badge, they explained, had already been deactivated at 3:42 p.m., 19 minutes before she even left her house that morning. She wasn't suspended. She was done. She tried to laugh, but no sound came. Just a nod. A blank stare. A quiet rage at herself for underestimating the man she once dismissed as harmless. Forgettable. Predictable. She used to joke that Dennis wouldn't survive a week in corporate politics. Turns out, you didn't need to. Because Dennis didn't fight for survival. He fought to erase. The hotel lobby reeked of lemon disinfectant and industrial failure. Monica sat in the corner by the vending machines, cross-legged in last week's blazer, a carry-on at her feet and 2 suitcases beside her that looked bigger than her current life. Her phone trembled in her hand. The screen lit up with Dennis's name. She hadn't spoken to him in days. She hadn't spoken to anyone in days. The silence wasn't just around her, it was inside her now, thick and humming. Her first night at the hotel, she told herself it was temporary. She'd figure it out. Get a grip. Fix it. By the second night, the minibar was empty, the room service ignored, and the mirror across from the bed had become something she avoided. It didn't lie. It just showed her the version of herself no one wanted to sit next to anymore. This morning, she tried Rachel again. Blocked. She tried her sister. I don't want to be in the middle, the message read. Even Greg had ghosted. The last message he sent: you should talk to your husband. This is too messy. Now, sitting in the stale hum of that lobby, watching families check in, businessmen pace with Bluetooth earpieces, a woman laughing into a call by the fireplace, Monica finally understood what Dennis had done. Not just left her. Not just exposed her. He'd made sure there was nothing left to crawl back to. No fallback job. No friends. No home. And worst of all, no illusion. She stared at the phone for a long time before pressing call. It rang. Once. Twice. Then, hello. His voice was low. Calm. Tired, but not sad. Dennis, she choked out. Please. I'm sorry. Silence. I was stupid. I lost everything. I lost you. I know that now. More silence. Then, finally, you didn't lose everything, Monica. She held her breath. You gave it away. For a laugh. She blinked hard, but the tears came anyway. Hot. Fast. Unstoppable. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't linger. Just quietly added. I used to think I wasn't enough for you. Turns out, I was too much. Too present. Too loyal. Too blind. Dennis, she whispered. Click. The line went dead. She stared at the screen, her reflection faint in the black glass. The call hadn't even lasted a full minute. She let the phone slide from her hand and hit the floor. The hum of the vending machine filled the silence again. Somewhere near the front desk, a toddler squealed with delight. A couple was checking in, arguing about whether to order Thai or Italian. Monica didn't move. She sat there for hours, shoulders shaking, arms wrapped around herself like armor that no longer worked. At some point, a bellhop asked if she needed help. She shook her head and pointed to the elevators. Room 403. Booked for 3 nights. The room wasn't hers. It never would be. Just a space between what she had and what she no longer deserved. The gate creaked when she pushed it open. It always had, but she used to tell Dennis to leave it that way, said it gave the house character. Now the sound scraped across her nerves. It had been a full week. 7 days since the lobby. 7 days since he hung up. 7 days since she checked out of the hotel and wandered through half a dozen dead ends, an Airbnb she couldn't afford past 2 nights, an ex-colleague who offered sympathy but no couch, a sister who told her over speakerphone. Maybe this is what rock bottom looks like for you. And now this. One last pilgrimage. She still had the spare garage code. He hadn't changed it. A part of her took that as a sign, a thread she could pull. The door opened easily. Too easily. Inside, silence. The kind of silence that only comes when something's been emptied, not just vacated. Erased. No photos on the walls. No keys on the hook. No scent of his cologne drifting in from the bathroom. The kitchen was spotless. Cabinets open. Empty. Not like someone had packed in a hurry, like someone had planned. The living room was stripped to its bones. The couch was gone. The rug she picked out at that flea market? Rolled. Vanished. Even the bookshelves had been dismantled. Only the walls remembered what had hung there. But the bedroom door was shut. She stood in front of it for a long moment, hand trembling above the knob, already knowing that opening it wouldn't lead to salvation. Only confirmation. She pushed. The room was perfectly staged. Bed made. Corners tucked tight like a military barracks. Nothing else. No note. No suitcase. No clothes. Not a single item of shared life. Except for one thing. Centered perfectly on her pillow. A frame. Inside, a single piece of white paper. Her words. Bold font. Ink darker than anything in the room. I'd totally cheat if I knew I wouldn't get caught. And underneath, handwritten in Dennis's precise, cold penmanship. Now you know. That was it. No signature. No date. Just finality. She let out a sound, something between a gasp and a wail. Her knees gave out. She fell forward onto the bed, face pressed to the sheets that no longer smelled like anyone. And she screamed. Not because of what was written, but because it was all that was left. He hadn't just walked away. He'd left her trapped inside her own punchline. And for the first time in her life, Monica understood the shape of a man's quiet rage. Not fire. Not fists. Not chaos. Absence. She'd gambled her life on a laugh. And Dennis had let her. Then watched her lose. Because sometimes, the worst revenge is making sure they live with it.